I was really interested in seeing the relationship between physical objects, the meaning behind those physical objects are left behind, and the way we might inherit these in the future. I'm going to have to move on because I'm sort of pushing for time, so we'll keep going on there. And the fact that some of the participants, as people have been saying today, were already engaging with these kind of very creative and very personal practices around death and dying, and those had been engaged with the hospice. So in effect, these were not people that were unused to being creative and that were not used to engaging creatively with death and dying. So I think that when my thinking about stuff and materiality and the affordances of both digital and physical space were changing and had changed over the time. And because the people that I was working with were so different to the people that I expected to be working with, the parameters of the ethics and the parameters of those had actually shifted the research to perhaps an even more interesting space. And that the people who were thinking about, these affordances, anyway, we'll move on from there, sorry. So, can go to the next one, sorry. So, there are a range of artists and designers who have been engaging with data and material in these kinds of ways, and I wanted to look at particularly at the Felton report, he produced a series of reports over the periods of his life which engage with his own data, and it's often an example for data in society, but he also produced a report about his father and his father's life, and this is a report of, the books that his father owned, the books that he loved, the movements that he's made, his image from his passport. And there's something about the design of this data, particularly for Felton, because this is his medium of communication, that seems quite appropriate. I don't know what his father was like, so I don't know if it's appropriate for his father, but for Felton it seemed quite appropriate. And it is this idea of, the appropriateness and the creation of the design, which is taking into account a specific person who's died, a specific person who's bereaved and whose understanding of the person is very specialized, a creative practitioner who has a particular practice, and an archive of stuff, be that physical or digital stuff, that engage in this kind of actor network or cycle that kind of creates that room for practice or for artistic exploration. So this is just a little sneak peek because the University of London defines that I should be a bit quiet about my research, but this is some of the kind of materialities that I've been exploring, that I've been interested in. People who over the years have kept floppy disks, and what happens when you bring those floppy disks and you put them into the computer and you go through them and they actually work. Just the excitement of the floppy disk working is quite interesting. And the books that become symbols of who that person was. So being within someone's home and having a session or two sessions that you're just exploring stuff and really trying to get to the bottom of who that person was, but not who that person was objectively speaking, who that person was to that person who's lost them. So I, as a designer, as a practitioner, as an artist, become an expert in that person's view of their loved one. So this is not something that's being produced for a family, it's not something that's being produced in a wider context, it's something very personal. And it's not exactly, I'm working with some art therapists on the project, and it's interesting because I'm working with art therapists, but it's not exactly art therapy either. But it relates to a movement in art therapy which is leaning much closer to artistic practice. So using the realms of art practice within art therapy and folding that back together. So this was mentioned earlier, actually, that dragon cancer. So as we're moving into this world where we're engaging with all the mediums available for us and the affordances of those mediums, so game dynamics, game graphics, from the music to the pixels to the way that it's designed, is a memorial for someone. And the playing of that narrative, to explain that dragon cancer, is the story of a young boy who had cancer, and they produced a game based on this narrative. So, and it is a memorial. So it's a game, and it's a memorial, and people buy it and play it. People who never knew the boy, people who don't have that kind of connection. And that's quite interesting for me. And I think it shows that kind of that curiosity and that kind of approach that we've been seeing throughout the day towards death and dying, which is something that we in some ways want to engage with, or feel a need to engage with, or a desire, however, you know, dubious that is, a desire to engage with. And not only is it a game, it was also a campaign. So Joel was the boy who had died, and with the launch of that Dragging Cancer, the video game honouring their son, they created that pancake party. He loved pancakes so much and loved stuffing his mouth as full as possible. I'm so amazed at the outpouring of love yesterday. So you find a family getting relief not only in direct relatives or even social network, but actually in the world. The world is sending these people love through the medium of this game produced to honour their son. And I find something quite interesting there. And again, interesting, yeah, in terms of this as well. I don't know how many of you have seen this before, the Bowie constellation. Yeah, so a few people have seen this before. The interesting thing about the Bowie constellation is that it's a fake, obviously. Because apparently there's a National Association of Astronomical Affairs who charts the constellation, and all the constellations have already been made. And actually the Bowie constellation is stealing stars from other people's constellations. And I think that this is really funny because it kind of mimics this ethics discussion, I find. It's like there's a bureaucratic system that defines that this thing has stolen other constellations. And yet, for people who are mourning Bowie, does that really matter? If I look up into the sky and I see those stars and I can see the Bowie constellation, it makes me feel something. Does it matter that the association of whatever defines this as not being true? So I'm interested, as I said, in kind of bypassing some of the bureaucracies and seeing that people who are being more creative with death and dying might be underestimated by pinning them to this title of being vulnerable. Because of course vulnerability defines a certain power relationship, because we protect people who are vulnerable. We place them into a kind of container and we don't allow them to experience things. And yet, I think this is quite a fundamental statement, and it says grief is slow. It's really a dinosaur in modern life. You can get a pizza in 3 minutes from a fast food place. In a minute you can get any information you want on the internet, but pregnancy and grief still take time. And I thought of Selena when we're looking at that as well. And I think it's really true. I think it's one of the unique opportunities in life where we actually get time to reflect and to take stock of life, and to reflect not only those who have died, but of course as an existential thing, to reflect on ourselves and our lives. And when we're doing the kind of, you know, the kind of crafting or the kind of continuing bonds where we're meaning making and sense making, we're placing those people at some position in our lives, and we're sense making who we are. And we've heard this morning as well, it's a tremendous potential for growth and development during this time. And that the study that I'm working on over a year with these participants is not only giving them the chance to participate in a piece of creative activity and to creatively interpret those they've lost, but also giving a space and a kind of defined time. We talked about ritual earlier, a kind of defined time in which on these times I'm going to come and I'm going to engage with you.
10 minutes left.
Okay, just quickly. I think this is the last slide anyway.
Okay.
So, and I find it interesting the way that humour is beginning to come to the forefront, particularly in British understandings of death and dying. And I'm a big Terry Pratchett fan, so I think Terry Pratchett was the first person I wrote an online memorial to when he died. So the first celebrity at least. And I think this humorous petition, it's a petition to death, asking death to reinstate Terry Pratchett to the world. And I think there's no better honour, and it's been signed by, 3,263 supporters. And I would say that the crux is, I would argue that through vulnerability, bereavement opens up a rare space in the digital age for existential reflection and deep embodiment of the self through